Hi, welcome. I'm April Wright, and I'm here to talk about supply chain and SaaS and some of the really, really just piles of rubbish that some of these services can be. I work as a security architect in my day job. I do a lot of other things outside of that, but I spend a lot of time evaluating vendors, evaluating services, making sure that our risk is as little as possible, that kind of thing. So a lot of times I have to fix gaps in their security. So I'm doing their jobs for them and improving their product so that other people will get the benefit from it, which is kind of interesting, kind of fun. We do a lot of feature requests and asking for better RBAC or something like that, right? A lot of integration requests. Not every SaaS vendor supports SAML authentication, so it's not great for enterprise when these things are missing. So what I'm going to talk about today are some design and architecture concerns with SaaS that I see all the time, like the most egregious things. So let's get started. So first, I'd like to talk about a flaw versus a bug. A flaw is more of a design and architecture type of problem. So it's something that was either designed on purpose, or it was something that nobody noticed, or something like that. Whereas a bug is it's a problem with code, so it's easier to fix. In theory, it might be like a cross-site scripting kind of thing, or something along those lines that is it's easily fixable. Maybe not always super easily fixable, but it's more easily fixable than a flaw. So the problem with both of these is that as they move through the SDLC, as you go from requirements to design to dev, test, and into prod, it gets exponentially more expensive to fix these things. So finding them early is really important. Unfortunately, a lot of the flaws that we find are in these SaaS products that are already in production. So it's a problem. Okay, so one of the first things that I mentioned was RBAC, a role-based access control. A lot of times I'll see it where it's just a privileged user and a non-privileged user, and that's not really granular enough for most applications. It's fine if it's like a really simple, really simple kind of app, and that's okay, and it works, but it doesn't work for everything. And the problem with this is that if you want to do things with your integration with your SAML identity provider, for example, and you want to use groups and you want to have like AD groups or something going into that application, there's no way to map those. There's no way to have more integrated access controls and identity controls around that system. And it is a really big problem. So the next really big problem, relying on the supplier to enforce restrictions. And I see this a lot with APIs in particular. They will have a full admin access API, and then they give you an API key. And that API key has access to all of the functions and all of the data that is allowed by the API. Now, the problem with that is that you're relying on the supplier. If the supplier's application is compromised, whoever is connecting to the API, then they have access to everything. So if they are enforcing their own restrictions and they're saying, okay, well, we only pull this data, and I can't tell you the number of times that I've heard that from a SaaS vendor. We only pull this data. Yes, but you have access to all of it. So if anything happens, that's a problem. That's not okay. We need to be looking for separated functions with an API is there should be an identity API, a log API, a partner API, an admin API, those kinds of things. Limit the scope of the API to just what, or read only API or write only API, those kinds of things. I mean, you can do it however you want, but the biggest red flag is when the vendor says we only pull X, Y, and Z, even though they have access to other things. So definitely make sure that the hairs on your back of your neck stand up when you hear that, because it's usually not good. So maturity evaluation in a vendor is an interesting exercise. There are a few things that I tend to look for when I'm looking at these vendors, and one of them is bug bounty. If they have a bug bounty program, it is a sign that they are fairly mature in that they understand that they are going to have insecurities. They may have already had some. They may be participating in other programs. Let's say they're in like a marketplace, like Atlassian Marketplace or Salesforce or something like that. They usually have to go through checks and self-assessments and things like that. So you can find out if they have a bug bounty through that, as well as other places. Another thing I look for is a formal security program, formal security group, team. If they don't have dedicated resources to security, that is usually another big red flag, because they're relying on developers, and most developers are not security minded. Developers, in a lot of cases, if, like, let's say they went to a formal type of software engineering type of program at university, they would maybe get one class in security, and it wouldn't be like sprinkled in with all the other classes. So they have a little bit of security knowledge, but not enough. So having a formal security team that can help with all the other things that are going on in the business is really important. 24/7 incident response is another one. A lot of times with these smaller marketplace type things and the smaller businesses, they don't have 24/7 incident response. They might have monitoring. If it's just a plugin or something, and they're not making a whole lot of money on it, and it's 2 people in a basement, then they're probably not going to have 24/7 incident response. Another thing, SDLC, software development lifecycle. If they have processes and procedures, they're scanning their code, they're doing peer reviews, they have a CI/CD pipeline that they know how it works, they're improving it, those kinds of things. That is really important. That shows a high level of maturity for a SaaS provider. There are other things. There's questionnaires, whole questionnaires about how mature a program is, but those are really the things that I think are most important. Okay, well, the logs. This is probably the worst part of SaaS, in my opinion. There is nothing worse than a SaaS that does not have logs available at all. A lot of times they're just available in the GUI. Sometimes they can be exported as like an XLS file or a CSV or something. Not very handy. Not when you're dealing with a SIM and you're trying to get all of your logs centralized and monitored and that kind of thing, which you should be. So if they aren't passing logs on to you, I mean, they undoubtedly have logs, but they are probably not segmenting their customers enough that they can give you those logs, which is another problem, which is a flaw. That's an underlying problem that's much harder to fix. If they can't give you logs, that is possibly the reason. Sometimes the logs will be available via API, and there are connectors and things like that to pull them, but it's more of a hassle. The worst part is when the logs are bad. Well, okay, that's not the worst part. No logs are the worst, but it's just as bad when there's terrible logs. So, for example, you want to be able to trace who did what to what object when, and what the activity was, and basically being able to trace an activity back to a human. That's the ultimate, or back to a service, or back to whatever the actor on the object was. So if you don't have all of that information, if you don't have a time, you just have a date, for example, which is something that I saw recently, that is completely unhelpful for log correlation. I mean, I don't know how else to say it. Like, you need timestamps to correlate logs. So without a time on the log, it's completely useless. It just drives me nuts. Sorry to go off on a rant here. This is one of the things that I see the most, and I've actually had to explain to people why logs are important in this industry. And having a good answer for that, being able to say that that it's important for us, for incident responders, to be able to track down incidents. It's important for insider threat, being able to look at all the activities that one person took. It's important for threat hunting. It's important for all the different kinds of activities that we would want to do from the security side. So having logs is one of the most critical things that SaaS should offer you, especially if you are building a SIM program, if you have log management in place or plan to. Make sure that all of your vendors have good logs. So, not sharing the benefits of cloud. This is an interesting one, and it touches a little bit on passing down logs. For example, they have logs. Let's say they have AWS, they have CloudWatch logs. They have those logs, but being able to share them with us, passing down that cloud feature would be nice. Another one, web application firewalls. Why doesn't every SaaS offer the ability to have either safe listing IP addresses, or having like the WAF features that they can control versus the provider controlling them, or just being able to set up like a VPN to it would be nice. Those kinds of things. It's really hard when you've got a bunch of SaaS and you want to protect it, but you can't because you don't have any control over who can connect to it, because it's SaaS and that's the nature of it. But sometimes you want a little more control. Let's say that you have a ticketing system that's all internal, but it's in the cloud. You may not want everyone to be able to connect to your ticketing system's URL or even be able to see it necessarily. So that is an issue. Another one is not offering staging environments in addition to production environments. It's not always necessary to have a staging environment, but it can be really helpful in a lot of situations. Oh gosh, there's so many problems. I had another one and I just lost it. Dang. Okay. It's like 8 a.m. here. I'm sorry. Okay. So no staging in prod environments. Don't pass things like WAF. I think that if you are going to have SaaS and you're going to be offering it to enterprise customers, all of these things that we've talked about here are things that they're going to want. If you're selling SaaS to a small business, they are probably not going to care about some of these things. It probably won't make a difference, and the cost is probably prohibitive to go with some of the more established, more mature types of providers. That is a risk decision. So that's a risk that your company has to either accept or not. When you the first step is to understand all of these things, understand where your provider is for all of these types of situations, for their RBAC, for restrictions that are being enforced, things like that. Fully understanding their security program, what happens if there's an incident, who do they contact, who do we contact, what are the SLAs for that kind of thing. Logs, making sure that they have the logs. Being able to fully evaluate a vendor requires looking at all of these things and more. But from an architecture perspective, these are generally the things that I look for, and I think that you should too. That's about all I have. Do we have any questions? I was expecting questions, so please.
So I can ask one, ability to reproduce code.
Say more about that.
So if someone compromises their build chain, can they prove it? Or can they prove that every bit of code that goes into their code base came from the developers, and which developers did the last commit?
Yes, code integrity is a big thing right now after SolarWinds, for sure. That is a combination of process and controls, in my opinion. So you have to have you have to think about the entire process, start to finish, of code. Where people touch it, where people can change it, where people have access to it, what systems are connecting to it. You want to have a code boundary so that code doesn't leave that boundary and it's in a secured environment. And that is a policy type of thing that is then becomes a technology solution. So when you have to make sure that the pipeline is secured by looking at each of the individual processes. So this is how the developer writes code. This is how they commit. These are the SaaS scans that run after they commit. Are we going to have peer reviews? Are we going to have other steps? And just thinking about the entire process start to finish. And then making sure that those processes are supported by secure technologies. So if you have too many repos, let's say you've got like a GitHub and a Bitbucket and some other stuff, maybe consolidate them. That is a really good way to keep things small, keep the attack surface small. There is an argument against that, which is that if one gets compromised, they all get compromised, but you can have segmentation and things within the platforms. You could also have more than one Bitbucket, for example, and just have but have it be the same repo so that all of the processes can be the same and you can be watching them. I always say just get all the logs, just every single log you can get it, put it into your Splunk or whatever, and just, that way you have it. Limiting them is probably not ideal unless there's a bunch of noise. I mean, of course you're going to tune it, but anything security related, I would always suggest going into that so that you can detect it, including stuff from your repos, including all of the steps and metadata artifacts around that process. There's no easy solution to code integrity. I mean, it's just that's the bottom line. It can be a somewhat long process, especially if you have a lot of code or you've acquired other code. It can take a while to really lock down a process at like a large company.
Yeah, I think the supply chain level for software artifacts is probably the project launched by Google that stands a chance of fixing that, but we're starting to get it fixed. We've got a question from Tim. Have you had any really important saves by the GRC processes you have in place?
Yes, so many. Yeah, so there is a review board that looks at all of the solutions that are being implemented. It consists of people across the business, legal, security, network, those kinds of things. I've had these at basically every company that I've worked at. They're really important because we ask the hard questions. We have a bunch of set of people looking at it with different backgrounds that care about different things. There was a, I'm trying not to say too much here. There was a something recently where, like I said, the logs didn't have a timestamp in them and they weren't exportable. So we worked with the vendor. I had to explain several times why logs are important, how logs work, what we want out of the logs. Ended up getting a written commitment from them that they would give those to us in the next quarter. So that was good. We have certainly not approved things that have come through that were just too risky, that would have otherwise been implemented just, you know, without any checking. So being able to like influence our supply chain is really important. And I think I spend a lot of time doing that because it is important, because when the supplier is secure, more secure, switching is perfect security. When the supplier is more secure, that helps us and it helps everybody. And that's really what the supply chain, to me, is about. Security in the supply chain is about helping everyone in that chain. It's about it's about all of us using the same systems. Like if I rely on something and you rely on me, then you are relying on that thing. So we all have to have the same level of trust. When we bring the baseline of security in SaaS up, it helps everyone. So that's why I do what I do. I'm trying to think of another good save. A lot of times I find these things after they've already been implemented, or like something that was here, you know, implemented before I got or I joined or something. So finding those things, fixing them via risk management processes, via vulnerability management is another avenue that I have to go through, which is risk management in conjunction with supply chain management. They go hand in hand for sure. Because a lot of the risks are about our suppliers. You know, we have themes for them like no RBAC or bad logs or uses insecure cryptography, like those kinds of things. So we can try to group them and see what the biggest problems across all of our vendors are, and that can help us fix them. It also helps us get better at evaluating vendors, and that helps our customers and everybody else.